Hi, Alan, and thank you very much for joining
Hello.
us. How are you today?
Hey, I'm doing very well. How are you?
Good and good. So it's nice and early there in Arizona, I take it.
Yes, it is 9 o'clock in the morning. Not too early, but it's the weekend.
And have you got your coffee there, or I say it's 5 p.m. here, so I'm on the cheap stuff. But oh,
Got my Renaissance Fair special wooden mug of my beverage.
oh, lovely. Hope that's wood turned.
Yeah,
So,
that's gorgeous.
so like I say, thank you very much for joining me and agreeing to do this interview. Really appreciate it, and I'm a huge admirer of your work. Now, you've probably seen the interviews that I've done with Gareth and Tim in the past. We're going to be doing a slightly different format in that I'm not going to be asking the questions. We've actually put the questions out to Michael Mordor's Goblins of Mordor army, and they've sent a few questions to me. So just to make sure you are completely unprepared for anything that I'm going to be asking you today.
I haven't seen any of the questions ahead of time. I feel this is like a quiz show now, right?
This is your life.
I've not been prepped ahead of time. Yeah, this is your life. Not been prepared.
Okay, so we have four goblins who have been asking questions, and I'm going to let you pick the first question. So, would you like to hear from Gareth, Michael, Scorpler, or Philip?
I think the king gets the first question.
I think the king gets the first question as well. So, Michael Mordor's question for you is, how did you get your name, Gorilla?
So, do you want the long version of the story or the short version of the story?
I don't, well, we'll start off with the short version, but I would be intrigued to
So
hear
the
the
short
long
version
version.
is, it wasn't always my avatar for my painting side of my life, but for various reasons, I kind of wanted and needed a new avatar, and there were two kind of simultaneous reasons why I got it. One was because I was getting to a point in my life where I was really not wanting to do commission painting anymore.
Hmm.
Side money, I really just wanted to focus on stuff for myself. And so I was thinking that what would get me motivated to occasionally sell some of my models. And really, animal charity work is kind of a passion of mine. And so I thought, if I was going to ever really be convinced to paint for money again or get involved with those types of things, it would be to support charities. And so, the idea that I wanted to really support animal charities with my hobby was one side of the thing. I also, Coco the gorilla, which is the famous gorilla who learned sign language and paint and had a cat and all of that. I just thought it was really kind of a funny image to imagine this, big hulking gorilla with a tiny little miniature, meticulously painting it. That image just really stuck with me, and the name just really popped, and it worked for both purposes. So,
Well, like I said, when I was following you on Twitter, I literally always had in my mind, because I'd never actually seen you before, that you literally were a gorilla. So,
for a long time, so I've had that name. I'm trying to remember exactly how many years it's been, maybe 4 years, something like that. But for the first 2 or 3 years, I purposely never posted a picture of myself
yeah.
on my Twitter feed for that purpose, just to kind of never break the illusion of who it was. And I start to do it occasionally now. I don't put a lot of pictures.
Yeah, well, the illusion is completely broken for me now, so... But I'm not
I
disappointed.
tell people sometimes when they see me now, like, this is just my convincing human suit I put on. Because people tell me I should put on a gorilla suit when I appear in photos. I say, well, what do you mean? I'm wearing my human suit.
I could imagine you'd get pretty sweaty. It'd be a bit ripe in there if you were wearing a gorilla suit as well, so...
It's a big investment for a joke,
I always wanted one of those, those T-Rex suits. Have you seen
When
those?
you run around in like all
Yeah,
floppy.
and the head flops around like I think that looks like a great thing to have, and it's one of those things I keep thinking to myself, I want to get one, but I've got no real reason or justification of actually owning one at the moment, so I'm sure.
One of my other hobbies on the side for exercise, I do indoor rock climbing. And
Oh,
for
right.
Halloween, they encourage people to come and climb in costume. And there was one Halloween where one of the climbers wore that costume and then was climbing on the rock walls. So like you were watching this T-Rex like climb up the.
It's just the gift that keeps on giving of all means, isn't it? Because I've seen it dancing. I've seen it doing the ninja challenge thing. I can't remember what it's called.
Ninja Warrior, right?
Ninja Warrior, that's it. I've seen it doing Ninja Warrior. I've seen 2 of them running a race and doing hurdles. It's absolutely. I love it. I just need a good enough reason to own one. I'm glad that you mentioned your charity work, because that's actually Michael's second question as well. So Michael wanted to know, what was it that made you start your charity work?
So kind of like what I said, that I really wanted to repurpose my hobby a little bit, because for years I was painting for myself. I was painting armies to play with and things, but I also spent a significant amount of my time painting for money. I started off as a high school teacher. High school teachers don't make much money, so I was painting for money just as a way to help pay the bills for my family. And as time went on, I got a lot of commission painters do. You got really frustrated that all your hobby time is going to other people, and your hourly rate doesn't really feel like it's proportional to the actual amount of skill and time you're putting into it. So I started to back away from that a bit and wanted to really refocus on doing stuff for myself, but also thought like, well, what is my whole purpose of even being out on social media? If I'm not trying to market myself as a commission painter anymore, like what is it really that I want to get out of having social media presence? So to me, this idea that really trying to support charity work as much as I can, my hobby, it was a big motivator to really work on increasing my social media presence and have a reason to have a brand.
And you, the ones that you support are the Gorilla Fund, As Pet Project, and unfortunately I've only got the URLs down on my notepad. AAWL, is that Arizona Animal Welfare Fund? I think it was.
A welfare league, yeah.
Welfare League.
So these 3, the Gorilla Fund one is, because it's my namesake, it feels like a natural fit. But all 3 of these charities, I've done a lot of research on, and I really support them because they get really high ratings on the charity watchdog organization. So all of them give really high percentages of their intake go right to their projects, not to overhead costs. I mean, there's some charities out there where 50% of donations just go to cover overhead costs, which means that every dollar you put in, only half of that is really going to whatever that charity is supposed to be supporting. Like the Arizona Animal Welfare League, I think their number is something like 90%.
Yeah.
Like you give, for every dollar you spend, 90% is going right to the end.
And that's the way that charities really should be.
Administrative costs. So I feel like good in supporting all these, but they also have really good missions. The Gorilla Fund was it's actually, the full name is the Diane Fossey Gorilla Fund International. So it's really based on her work and the things that she started in Africa. It's about preserving the animal habitat, but also educating the communities that are there on what they can do to have more sustainable farming practices and other things that don't endanger the habitats for the animals that are there, and so helping the local populations live without endangering them.
Yeah, I mean,
the Arizona Pet Project is. So the Arizona Pet Project and Arizona Animal Welfare League kind of do 2 sides of the coin for helping animals in Arizona. So the Arizona Animal Welfare League is Arizona's oldest no-kill animal shelter, and they're also the largest animal shelter in the state. So they do a lot of projects and do a lot of community outreach to try to make sure that pets are getting adopted and getting good homes and getting the care they need. Arizona Pet Project tries to keep animals out of the shelters by doing 2 things. So they go out and do a lot of free community spay and neuter clinics to try to help the animal population, and also a lot of their money goes to covering the costs of pet service for animals who are with families who may be having hard times and can't pay the vet bills. What will happen is, if an animal gets sick and the family can't pay the vet bills, either the animal just passes away or the animal just gets turned over to a shelter, and they say basically like, look, we can't take care of him anymore, it's too expensive here, and they just finish.
Yeah, yeah.
So the Arizona Pet Project tries to help cover some of those costs so that the animal can stay with the family. I think about like little kids who have to give away their best friend because their best friend's sick, and that just breaks my heart. So these are the three charities that I try to raise money for through my hobby. It may not sound like huge dollars to other people, but so the last 2 years I've tried to do fundraisers. Any money I take in from projects, 25%, minimum of 25% goes right to the charities.
Mm-hmm.
If anyone ever did hire me for stuff, at least 25%, sometimes more. But also I try to do a targeted fundraiser every year. So 2 years ago, I had Grayed Out Productions. I don't know if you recognize him from Twitter. So he's Michael. His Twitter handle is Grayed Out, or Gray Like Storms. I think it's Gray Like Storms.
Okay.
He makes dice bags. And so he made dice bags with my logo fabric on it. We got it custom printed, and he made these dice bags, and we basically sold them for a donation, and 100% of the money that people donated went to animal charities. And so we raised $600 that little fundraiser. And then last year, we got matching dice trays made by Eris Savad, who's a dice tray maker. So she helped me out with that. And at that point, people started coming out of the community and just saying, hey, what can I help with? And so people were donating painting commissions. People were donating models. Atlantis Miniatures donated some models that I could give away as prizes. Did some raffle prizes for painted models for me. And we raised $1,600 last year.
Wow.
To those charities. So I'm trying to do something like that. This year, with everything going on, it's a little weird. I feel kind of weird asking people for donations right now when everybody's struggling so much. I'm trying to think about what I do this year, or maybe just plan for an even bigger splash.
Yeah, yeah.
So, doing what I can. It's in the grand scheme of things, it's small, but it does make a difference.
No, absolutely. I mean, you said it's only a small amount, but the amount of people in the community who then got on board with that, and then they
I think it can just keep growing. And
it's wonderful. And you've also got the merchandise on your website. I noticed 100% goes to the charities too.
So yeah, I'm wearing one of the shirts right now. So yeah, 100% of anything that I get from Cafe Press, I just turn around and give right to the charities. So.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so that's everything from Michael. He only wanted to know those two things. Okay. We've got Gareth, Scorpler, or Philip.
Let's go with Gareth.
Gareth. Okay, so Gareth has a couple of airbrush questions for you. So the first one is, how much do you use an airbrush on a typical Mini?
0%. I own some airbrushes. I have used them to do some priming and base coating. I do like them for that purpose, but my current house that I have, I don't have a great space to have a permanent hobby setup in. I could, because this is my home office. I work from home a lot of days, so this is my home office. I have a space I could set something up, but I have cats, and I'm always worried about what they're getting up to, and I'm not paying attention, and they tend to like to chew on things. So it's a little hard for me to have a permanent setup. And I also, the only time I'm able to spend with my wife is during times when I would normally be hobbying. So I have my temporary hobby setup goes out in the dining room, which is next to the TV. So like in the evenings, if she wants to be watching TV, she can be watching TV, and I can be basically close to her doing my hobby. And so for that purpose, for that reason, anytime I want to airbrush, I have to get everything out of the closet, set everything up, my airbrushing, and then tear it all down and put it away, which means, to do, since I only tend to work on 1 or 2 models at a time, to prime or to base coat a model, it takes almost as much time just to set up and tear down. My airbrush is to just the paintbrush to do. So that's my long answer to saying that I really, at this point, don't use an airbrush at all.
No, probably.
Did it validate the rest of his question?
Pretty much, yeah. He was going to ask about whether you're using a 0.2 or a 0.3, and does that depend on what you're doing? But if it's down to 0, then that pretty much leaves that.
I mean, it's certainly a skill that I would like to spend some time to learn. I have a friend, Zach. He goes by Blues Light Painting. He uses an airbrush quite a bit, and he's always trying to convince me to use it more. And he was considering this year coming out to Arizona, but restrictions and everything. I was going to have him sit me down and force me to learn about how to use my airbrush and stuff. So maybe one of these days when I have somebody like who will sit me down and just make sure, because the little bit I've used it has been mostly exercises and frustration.
Yes.
It's just, getting clogs and it's, I don't have a ton of hobby time on a weekly basis always. And so the idea that I'm going to spend a few weeks just trying to get over the frustrations of this tool that I don't even really, at least not part of my painting process anyway. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's hard to get motivated to spend that time.
Well, I'm certainly not going to. I use one myself, mostly for priming, but I do the Xenophil highlights as well. But like you said, it's a learning process, and you have to get through that. I mean, to be honest, I'm not the best airbrush user in the world. I'm not the best painter in the world, certainly. I find it fun, and that's what I like about it. I see it as another tool in my toolkit.
Absolutely. I've been painting for over 20 years, and it's sometimes really difficult to force somebody to learn new tricks, right? With anything else, if somebody's trying to make you learn something new, you're like, well, but what I'm doing is already working. What?
Yeah. Okay, the other question that Gareth had was, how can I swear loyalty to your painting archfey patron? I don't know if that was a serious one or not.
The joke is always, who did you sell your soul to get the painting skills? And it's a funny joke, and I play it up sometimes too. But on the other hand, I'm the first to tell people, and I'm very happy to show my first model. If you have it and you want to put it up on the screen, or I can email it to you or send it to you if you have access to it. Happy to show my first ever miniatures.
Was it the Hero Quest ones?
Yeah, the Hero Quest models. Yeah, my first ever painted minis. So, the idea that I was, my right hand was touched by the gods to give me painting talent should be easily dissuaded by looking at the first models I ever painted. It's really, painting is mostly skills that you develop over time, and there's really no substitute to practice and to learning. Go out and watch videos, get somebody who you think is a better painter than you, show you some tricks. It's really just long years of practice. I think there was two things that slowed me down even. I think that most people could get to where I am or somewhere close to that in a shorter time than 20-something years that it took me. But I'm one of those stubborn people who don't really like to learn from other people. I try to figure things out on my own. So
yeah,
I mostly look at what other people have done and try to think in my own head how I might reproduce that, and then try things on my own rather than just ask the person, like go watch videos or something. That's my own personality quirk. But I also, like a lot of us, I got into this hobby first, not really as a painter, but as a hobbyist, like a gamer. I got into Warhammer Fantasy back in the late 90s, eventually got into 40K. I've played Fordheim and Malifaux and War Machine over the years. And so, when you collect your armies and you want to start painting them, if you paint the first mini, you kind of want all the rest of the models in your army to look relatively close to what that first test color scheme looks like. Otherwise, So for any time I was working on an army, I would spend 3 to 5 years painting that army, and the skills would be very stagnant during that time because I wasn't really trying new things, or I wasn't trying to push myself because I wanted everything to still look the same. There were big chunks of my painting career where there would be 4 or 5 years where no skill progression happened. Then I would sell that army, quit that game, whatever, join a new game, new models, and then all of a sudden you'd see a jump in my skills because I was trying something new for the first time in a long time. So a few years ago, I just kind of got really exhausted and sort of frustrated with the tabletop games. I didn't feel like I could keep up anymore with the release schedule and rules changes, and so I just ended up selling my last army and saying, I'm just going to paint on whatever I want. And so I feel like the last 4 years or so, I've had the biggest jumps in my skill just because I'm now focused on trying and all.
Yeah, I know about release schedules. I think that pretty much what's put me completely off being a player. I mean, I started off as wanting to play, then felt the need to paint to a level that I felt was acceptable. And by the time I got that far, a completely new rule set had come out, or everyone was, and I just couldn't keep up. So
And I'm not a fast painter either, so even the time it takes me a whole edition to finally get a fully painted army, and especially with Warhammer 40K or a game like that, you know units become quickly invalidated when a new rule set comes out.
yes.
I started my first 40K army was orcs, and that was back before vehicles were really a big part of the orc army. So I had like 200 something models in my big foot slaughter orc army. As soon as I got them all assembled and started playing games with them, it really quickly dawned on me I was never going to be able to paint that many models. So I ended up selling that army and buying Thousand Suns instead. And so that was a much smaller model count army that I felt was manageable. I got that army fully painted with all of their demons that they could summon and everything right when they switched to the 4th edition, that where the demons were no longer part of the Chaos Space Marine army. So now it's like, well, now I don't actually even have a fully painted army anymore now that they took my demons away. But, yeah, so I've experienced it just like a lot of people.
It's like, yeah, it's like they keep moving the goalpost every time you get somewhere. Yeah, I've actually been to Warhammer World, and there's literally people with full armies, and they've only got 3 colours on their minis, and they just put anywhere because that's the rules apparently. If you play at Warhammer World, you have to have a painted army as long as it's got 3 colours. So you just put 3 random colours.
Yeah, the 3-color rule. I mean, certainly it's nice to play against painted armies no matter what. It's nice to have color on the minis, but some people will always say, like, well, for your armies, the 3-foot distance rule is, they just have to look good from 3 feet away, and I appreciate that, and I will trumpet that and champion that for everybody else, but that's just not how my mind works. I paint every model in my army to my current standards. So because my thing was always, if I had my own models in front of me, somebody comes over and looks at them, picks them up, looks at them closely, and gives me a compliment. I don't want to have to be like, well, yeah, they're okay, but you should really see my good stuff. I never wanted that to be how my response has to be. I want it to be like I was always really proud of what was in front of me, like this is my best at painting effort, which really not an efficient way to paint armies, I can tell you. Like I said, led to long periods of stagnation in my painting because it took forever to paint.
Okay, so we've got Gareth and Michael questions out. So, Scorpla or Philip?
And I keep ignoring Philip here. I feel bad, Philip. Let's go with Scorpla, the Goblin Queen.
Scorpla, yes. Okay, so the Goblin Queen asks, what's the most challenging mini you've ever painted?
I especially lately, I try intentionally to pick minis that are going to challenge some aspect of. So it's kind of tough to pick a single most challenging mini because every model I pick has something like. This is, I guess eventually people see this, but I don't know if you saw the work in progress I posted last night.
Yes, was it the lady?
Old woman.
Yes, the old woman.
So I've never tried to paint, especially at that scale, like elderly person's skin. So I was like, this is going to be tough. Let's just go for it. So like I'm always looking for a model that's going to challenge. If I can sort of slightly change her question, it's maybe one of the models I'm happiest with how it came out and the story behind it is my favorite. So there's this is in the models I sent you, so you should be able to put a picture of it up. The Wolf and Prowler from Confrontation. So he's kind of like a ninja wolf.
Yes.
He's got a banner behind him. So that many was I do a lot of freehand, and I have done some banners in the past, but that was my the most recent, like first attempt getting back into banners to paint really detailed stuff on a 2D surface and then try to incorporate shading and doing all that stuff. And so I picked that mini because there was my friend, Blues Light Painting, wanted to do a paint exchange with me. We each painted a miniature at the top of whatever we could do at the time to really push ourselves and challenge, and then we just trade models, and then we have this cool little reminder of where the other person was. Their painting journey at that time, and it was also a cool bonding experience. So, he and I got even closer through doing this with each other. And so that was the mini that I surprised him with. And we then did live unboxings. So being able to see him, who, I guess from his point of view, he says that I was the person who inspired him to start miniature painting. So to be able to have him get that model, to see his reaction in real time as he unwrapped it for the first time, and to know that it was something I was doing to push my skills was one of the most satisfying miniatures that I've ever painted. Certainly was a challenge in doing the banner and doing all the freehand on the wolf and trying to get the fur to look right. And
it's wonderful. It's quite a feeling when someone admires your work. I mean, going back to the Harlequin, it was actually on display in the shop for a while, and I think the coolest thing that ever happened to me was when my nephew would bring his friends from school, point out the Harlequin on the shelf and say, "That's my uncle's."
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I was like,
I guess there was another model that just came to mind too. So I did not send you any pictures of this, although I did post some in Discord channel last week. Back in the early 2000s, I did a flying dark elf dragon.
Oh yes.
For Golden Demon competition. So I was doing that for Golden Demons, and that was back before DW produced any flying dragons. Now they have flying dragons all over the place, but back when all of their models were metal, they didn't sculpt any of it to be flying. It wasn't until they did the hard plastic that they could balance them. Right?
Yeah.
So at that time, all of their dragons were basically like the drawing of Trogdor from Strombat, if you know that reference. They're like on two legs and they're all snaked up and hunched over. So they're all just like standing like. And so I chopped up that dark elf metal dragon, basically elongated it, had to resculpt big chunks of the body and get it so that he was flying, swooping down. And that was the first major conversion project I had ever taken on. And certainly was a huge challenge to me to learn green stuff sculpting enough to get by and make it seem just the model. I spent, I think, probably 5 months just converting miniature, on and off. And then as I look back, I'm proud of it, but I wish I had been able to spend even a little more time on the painting, because it got to the point where I was wanting to enter it in that year's competition.
Yeah.
By the time I got done with all the conversion work, I only had like a month left for the competition, and I couldn't devote nearly as much time to painting it as I did to converting it. But I think that still sticks out as a very ambitious project that I didn't really know what I was really getting into when I decided I was going to do it. Ended up good, and I'm proud of it, and that was a good challenge.
Do you still have it?
I do.
Oh wow!
Unfortunately, he is broken off his peg, because I'll tell you the story with this. I'll grab it in a second. So I took it to Golden Demon, and on the way back, the airport security. So the box was marked super fragile, had fragile all over it. It was going through the metal detector. As it came out the other end, there was a guy there trying to hurry everybody up through the line. So he was grabbing bags and throwing them down the conveyor belt.
Oh,
he just grabs my box and just throws it, and it just rolls.
Oh dear.
And I almost yelled at him, but this was right after 9/11. And I was like, yeah, yelling at airport security right after that's a good way to get arrested. So I actually started to yell and then I picked up the box and things were rattling around inside. This is not good. So it broke him off his peg, and it broke his lance that I had created. I had to redo those both, and then over the years, in just moves from different houses and stuff, he broke off of his peg again. So he's not currently flying, but...
Oh, wow.
The lighting in here is maybe not, the greatest for showing this off. So he should be resting on a peg and flying like this.
I do remember
doing a dive.
Yeah, that was awesome.
You can feel free to pull that picture off of Discord, or again, let me know and I can send it to you if you.
I think I will.
Yeah, that's one. Sometimes people who've been in the hobby for a long time and they just meet me and then they kind of find out, they're like, "Well, is there anything I might have seen?" And if I tell them about that dragon, they're like, "Oh, I remember seeing that because it was in White Dwarf." And
oh, cool. Did you go to Warhammer World for the Golden Demon, or did you?
No, this was when they had U.S. Golden Demon. So this was in Baltimore and then Chicago and then L.A. So those three.
Cool. Right, Claire's final question is, which mini are you most proud of? Might have been covered in the first one, who knows?
Yeah, so I think, that Wolf and Prowler, I think I'm most proud of, but proud is a hard word, because then you start just like choosing your children,
Yeah.
You like different miniatures for different reasons, and so I think I'm happiest with that model just because of not just how it turned out, but the friendship that was bonded over doing that project. And so I'm very happy with that model and everything that happened. In terms of what I'm most proud of, I mean, certainly the dragon that I just showed off is my most extensive version work, and I'm some of the recent models that I've done, I think the gorilla bust.
Yes, I love that.
Gorilla chief bust. Sometimes you just, I'm not going to be humble at the moment. Like, you just impress yourself when you paint some models sometimes. I painted that thing. It was really just meant to be a palette cleanser between other models. I wasn't really expecting anyone to kind of doing that. And somehow just the tones I got in the fur, the expression on his face that I was able to bring out, just impressed myself that I was able to do that. And
I loved it. It was the eyes that really caught me, because that's it. Eyes are the hardest things for any miniature painter to do, but they just really did feel like they were full of life. Well, not in a joyous way, because of the expression, but yeah, it just looked like he had the weight of the world on his shoulders.
He kind of came out of nowhere, because again, I wasn't really expecting much. It's really honestly a pretty simple bust. It's not like it's a bunch of pieces or anything. I really wasn't expecting much, but it turned out.
Okay, so we're going to move on to Philip's questions now. So Philip is asking, who would be the painters that have influenced you in developing your painting style?
That's a good question. The person who's most responsible, I say this it's funny because it may not actually be super apparent in my current, because things evolve over time. But there was a painter named Brian Shaw, and some people might recognize his name, some people might not. He was a huge competitor in the U.S. Golden Demon circuit back in the 90s and early 2000s. He has, I always get the exact number wrong, somewhere between 36 and 40 Golden Demon awards.
Wow.
Which is some of the most of anyone in the world. And he happened to be the part owner in the game store where I got my start in doing hobbying, and he's the person who encouraged me when he saw some of my early painting work. He's like, if you keep practicing, I think you can be good enough to compete in Golden Demon. He's really pushing me, and he's like, if you can finish up these pieces, I'm going to take you to Games Day with me, and we're going to compete. So it was a big motivator early on, a big encourager to mm-hmm. He was one of those people who, again, I never sat down and asked for painting advice from him, but he had all of his stuff in the display at the game store, and it was just phenomenal things. And so I would just sit there, study his miniatures, and try to figure out how he chose his colors, where he put his highlights, to figure out how would he do these blends and fades that he was able to create. And I would go home and try it. So a lot of my early models looked a lot like his stuff, because he was the person I was emulating and trying to mm-hmm. copy it from. So there were even people in the early days when I was competing at Golden Demon, when I would go to pick up my models, would go, "Oh, we thought this was painted by Brian Shaw," which was a huge compliment to me because he was the guy I looked up to. And but over time, his style it's kind of pastel-y, especially at that time. A lot of pastel colors, a lot of soft colors, a lot of soft fades, and so that's, you can kind of see it a little bit with the dragon. If you're looking, and this is kind of pastel-y, fairly desaturated lights, and so over time I started to diverge from him a little bit. It's sort of technical. He would do a lot of his highlighting right at the edges of areas. So if there was like an armor plate, it would be mostly a solid darker color, and then there would be several layers of highlighting right near the edge, and then like on the extreme it would be the brightest highlight.
Yeah,
this stuff would kind of look like that. I started to kind of take it back to where most of my transitions would happen closer to the recess. There would be several layers of transition near the recess, and then the larger flat area would be solid lighter color, and then some extreme highlighting on the edge. There was a little bit of divergence in how things started to look. That's best exemplified if you look at some of my Troll Bloods models from back when I played War Machine. And the effect a lot of people would say is they looked almost like cel-shaded miniatures. They tended to look a lot like animations then on the 2D Mini. So that was my style for a long time. And when I stopped playing War Machine, and the last 4 or 5 years, I've really tried to push myself in other directions. I think style has again started to evolve a different way. And I really credit Scale 75 paints for my more recent transition. I think this is a good lesson for people to take away, because one of the things that companies manufacture their paints for particular painting style. If you want to know what their paints do best, go look at their sort of official paint guides that they give you. And however they're using their paints is probably how they intended their paints to be used and how they've sort of formulated and why they have them.
That makes sense, yeah.
So like GW has their paint system where it's like, hey, here's your base color, your layer. You've got special highlight technical paints like the dry brush paints. You've got washes. You've got all these products to do a certain paint. So if you're somebody who's been using that paint system for years and years and years, you're kind of locked in. Your creativity gets sort of locked in a box of you just keep using the same products. And so one of the things I did when I got the Scale 75 paints to try them is rather than, all right, I'm just going to keep painting with the same paints I always have, but I'm going to add in a few colors from Scale 75. I just started saying, the next 4 models I paint, I'm only going to use these new paints. I'm going to use any paints that I've ever used. And all of a sudden, you start realizing that, hey, this new brand of paints doesn't work the same way as my old brand of paints does. There's little subtle differences, and it forces you to adapt. And as you force to adapt, you learn new things, and you learn new tricks, and you learn more about paint consistency. You learn more about all different types of aspects of painting. And so I found that some of the biggest jumps in my skill and some of the times when I had the most fun was when I forced myself to just try a whole new paint brand and not allow myself to go back to the tried and true paint colors and paint brands that I was using in the past. And it's forced me to learn and new things that I can take back even when I go back and use other types of paints or other models or something. I was also, to go along with that, I was painting some Guild Ball miniatures, which was a totally new style of miniature as well. So just really trying to put myself outside my comfort zone was a really big learning process for me. It's something I would recommend for people too if they feel like they're getting a little stuck in a rut. They really want to break out and maybe improve. I would recommend getting some new style of miniatures, some things you've never painted before. That could be from a different game line. It could be busts. It could be 75mm scale models, something that's really outside of whatever you're used to doing. Then force yourself to try a new paint brand. Those two things would help.
No, I think I might actually take your advice on that, because I have actually found myself in the rut, hence the reason why I pretty much started a YouTube channel. Most of my paints are Citadel Games Workshop, and I have been moving more towards the Villeco paints, and is something that I did realise when I moved over to the new paints was they're just very, very different. but I'm still finding myself paint the way that I normally do with the Citadel ones. So I'm actually going to take that advice on, and I'm going to possibly look into some new paints. So Scale 75 is one that I've always been looking at. I've always their availability in the UK, I'm not too sure, but we'll check that out. So.
They're definitely different paints, and started doing a lot more glazing because they really do a good job with. They're good for glazing.
Excellent.
So that was something I really never used. I guess used to paint with Citadel or P3 paints. Those are my two main paint brands I kind of came up with. And it wasn't until I got into Scale 75 that I really realized the power of glazing techniques. And that's kind of what I do all my stuff with now.
Cool. Philip's other question was, what or who exactly got you into the hobby? And you've already mentioned Brian and the fact that you started off with gaming originally. But
and I'll tell you even a longer version of that story. And I don't know, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no.
So my first models ever were those Hero Quest models we talked about, and where you put up a picture of those. And then I really enjoyed painting those, and I thought, it'd be really cool to make a chess set out of miniatures. And for growing up, there was a store called Hobby Bench that was in our local mall. We would go to the mall, whether I would go with my friends or we'd go, there to go eat in the food court with my family or something. And I would always want to go to Hobby Bench and look at all the miniatures. And they had old D&D minis in there. They had some of the early Citadel minis in there. They had the BattleTech miniatures, the metal BattleTech miniatures at the time. And I would just look at all these minis and I would dream of, what if I made a chess set out of these? You have dragon riders for queens, and you had the knights for the knights, and all this kind of stuff. So when I actually was graduating from high school and going off to college, and I was like, this is a great time. I'm going to pick up a hobby so that when I'm off at college and I've got downtime, I've got something to do. So I started just buying a bunch of miniatures I think would look really cool as a chess set. I was going to have an evil side that had undead and chaos, and I didn't really know much about the factions at that time. It's the pawns on the bad side were all going to be skeleton warriors, and the pawns on the good side were Bretonnian men-at-arms, and so I bought a bunch of miniatures and I started painting them again. And when I started with the Hero Quest minis, I was just using. I didn't know anything about paints. I didn't know what I was doing. I bought whatever paints I saw, which ended up being Testors enamel paints, which are really not ideal for painting miniatures. Really more for cars and model cars and stuff. So I painted all of those in those Testors enamels, and so at least for this time, I got the right paints. I got the Citadel paints. Yeah. They were the right miniatures, and so I learned somebody told me you're supposed to prime your miniatures, and it's I learned some things right off the bat that ended up making it so those first from the first miniature I painted for the chess set to the fifth miniature looked so much better than the first miniature that it quickly dawned on me that this was a losing proposition at the time, because by the time I got finished with my last miniature for my chess set, it was going to look so different from the first miniature that it wasn't really going to be a cohesive thing anymore. So I kind of abandoned that, but as I was going to the game store to buy more models or to buy more paints, every time I walked in there, the manager or whatever would say, can we show you how to play the game? We've got these, armies over here. We can do a demo. And I knew that if I played a demo of Warhammer, that I would go all in, and I would be over. I'd be spend all the money that I was able to resist for a long time. But then my younger brother, who's about 5 years younger than me, came home one day. And he somebody moved across the street and it was about his age and they became friends. He says, "Oh, my friend, he's starting to play this game called Warhammer, and I think I'm going to play it with him." I was like, well, my fate is sealed. I guess if my brother's getting into the game, I might as well too. So he and I went to the game store. We had a demo done. I bought a whole High Elf army. He bought a whole Chaos army, and the rest is sort of history. But it wasn't really intentionally trying to get into doing the hobby gaming. I was actually trying to do something else, but ended up getting deep into the gaming side of things from that point on for a while.
Oddly enough, I have my own question for you,
Okay.
which was, have you ever made your chess set? Did you ever finish it?
No, I never finished it. It's something I've thought about going back to over the years. Now that I think I could get a consistent finish. But the idea of it has changed over time too.
Mm.
You know, it was supposed to be a fantasy chess set originally, but some of the things with the fantasy miniatures, they start to become a little unwieldy to put on
Yes.
the single bases you would need for the. So then I started thinking, well, maybe like a Tyranid versus Space Marines might be a better theme for the chess set in terms of being able to find enough miniatures that are cool looking, but you can sort of fit on a plinth. Yeah, I've not gone back to it, and I'm not sure I ever will. It might be one of those unfulfilled quests in my life, partly just because I'm having so much fun right now, just painting something different with each model that I do. And, the idea of going back to, okay, I'm going to paint 8 models that are essentially identical to each other, and I'm going to it just doesn't really hold as much interest for me as it once did. So.
And finally, what advice do you have for anyone who's just starting out in miniature world, wanting to do painting? What advice would you have for them?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to avoid the more obvious choices just because I think you've done a great job of having an intro video for people, and I think there's a lot of information out there. You can listen to your previous guests as well who talked about some of the things about getting into the hobby. So I'm going to avoid some of the more obvious answers to that and say that I think one of the important things, other than just some common skills that every painter needs, which is just learn to your paint a little bit, paint with the right paint consistency, learn brush control, realize it's going to take some practice to get control over your brush to where you can get clean finishes on your models. I think it's important for new painters to set goals for themselves about what they really want to get out of their paint. So people will join and start miniature painting for a whole number of reasons. Some people want to play the games and they want to have fully painted armies, and that's really their motivation for painting. Other people are role-playing game players and they just want to have their character well represented and they want to put a lot of pride. People who play role-playing games often feel a strong attachment to their character, so they want to be able to represent that person with a good amount of fidelity in what's in their imagination. So maybe they want to practice some and they want to be able to do a good job on that mini. Other people have aspirations to do this as their artistic outlet and really push themselves and to eventually get into like competition level painting pieces. And so I think each of those different goals, which it's okay to have your goals change over time, but each of those goals I think help give you perspective in what you're working on and what skills that you should focus on. Because, for example, if your whole goal is to just paint a full army because you want to be able to play with your friends and have a fully painted army, don't go out there and subscribe to a whole bunch of people like Sergio Calvo or the world's most amazing miniature painters and just drool over their stuff and feel like you're inadequate. Because if that's not what you're trying to achieve, it doesn't really do a lot of good to compare your work to people who have a different purpose in their miniature painting. And so, the things that you're going to go practice and that you should be looking to compare yourself to is something completely different. I think having your goals clearly set and giving you a focus for improvement and in alignment with your goals, I think is going to be important to perspective as you can.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. Well, that's all the questions that I have for you. Thank you very much, Alan. You've been a wonderful guest.